Al Quds Day will be held on the week before. In some countries, due to the lack of police authority on Friday, the rally is made on another day, or there is only permission for holding conferences on that day. From the beginning of Ramadan's revolution, Imam Khomeini stated that one of his goals was liberation of Palestine from its occupant government. After the revolution, all official ties to Israel were broken and Israel's embassy in Iran was granted to the Palestinians. When a new Israel raid began on the south of Lebanon on Ramadan 13th, Imam Khomeini gave a speech in which he announced the last Friday of the month of Ramadan to be known as Al Quds Day. Salawat.
Hassan, did you write that yourself? It's okay. It's okay to get some help. But really, really excellent job. Thank you very much. I think she deserves the reward of another salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Before we invite Sheikh, just a reminder about some upcoming programs. Inshallah, tomorrow night we have another program, especially one after which we'll have Sheikh and the youth, the boys, spend some time together. And Sheikh, if you're willing, then inshallah we'll organize something similar one night for the girls to also spend some time with you and ask any questions or raise any issues or concerns so that you can have that discussion amongst yourselves, inshallah. So we'll do that soon as well. As soon as we have confirmation about the upcoming Eid, inshallah, God willing, we have a United Eid on Tuesday. But as soon as we have that confirmation, we'll send those details out. So keep your eye out on our WhatsApp, website, Instagram, and email. And if you still use text message, then good on you, like me. But as soon as we have that information, inshallah, we'll send that out to you. Whichever day that Eid is, the program will be this. That 6:30 in the morning, we'll have Dua Nudba. 7 o'clock, we'll have Eid prayer, followed by khutbah. And then we'll have some refreshments, and you can all go and have some breakfast somewhere. So very nice, very easy, inshallah, for anybody who continues working on that day. It's early enough that you can join the program and then get to work, inshallah, at a reasonable time as well. With all of that said, thank you to all of our attendees, all of you, all of our sponsors, all of our volunteers, all of our reciters, our shuyukh, everybody who's been involved in the programs, everybody who's been involved in making sure that the programs have been possible. Thank you so much. It's been a really, really intense month. There's been so many things happening, so many great programs, not just here, but everywhere. And it's with a lot of gratitude that on behalf of Imam Hussein Islamic Center, we say thank you for all of your hard work and support. None of this, as I've said many, many times, none of this is possible without any of your support. So that includes the community, our sponsors, volunteers, workers, our shuyukh, reciters, everybody. It takes all of us to make sure that these programs come together and they're effective and they're quality and that you enjoy them, inshallah. Please, as you invite Sheikh, please share the reward of a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad with all of these people. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بفضل الله بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله والحمد حقه كما يستحقه حمدا كثيرا الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله اللهم لعن أول ظالم ظلم حق محمد وآل محمد وآخر تابع له على ذلك اللهم لعن العصابة التي جاهدت الحسين وشايعت وبايعت وتابعت على قتله اللهم لعنهم جميعا ثم الصلاة والسلام على خير خلق الله أجمعين محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. Once again, we are gathered to commemorate this event that is known as the International Day of Quds. Unfortunately, when people look at the subject of Palestine in general, they tend to look at what is happening in the world today and whatever the current events are. And this is usually the way what people look at every event. They don't look at the long-term reasons and the reasons why these things came to pass. Anytime an event happens, for example, you're watching the news today, they'll say Russia invaded Ukraine. They won't tell you the backstory or nothing. They'll say this is Russian aggression without telling you the whole story. And is the case for Palestine. And Palestine, you would say, is the focal point because this is the thorn that's left in the Middle East, the occupation there. However, this is something that had been plotted and planned for many years before. This is something where you can go back to the 19th century to see its roots. Long time ago. Just to give you an idea of what the 19th century was, it was before Australia had become a federation. At the time where Australian states like New South Wales, Victoria, and South Australia were entities living alone. So there were states living alone at this time, and this is where the agreements and the plans and the conspirators had come along to form the nation or the illegitimate nation of Israel that exists today. Now, the day where it all came together was after the Second World War, because they needed something to allow them to have a driving force. For example, to let you understand, when the Americans wanted to invade Iraq, they wanted the opportunity to invade Iraq, and September 11th was that opportunity that allowed them to have a reason to invade Iraq. So they said, we'll go into Afghanistan at first, and on the way we'll also take Iraq in this manner. But September 11th, in which they kept pushing, even though the people that they say committed the attacks on September 11th were majority Saudi nationals. Saudi Arabia was not on their agenda. Likewise with Palestine. They said that we need to give these misplaced Jews, these persecuted Jews, a home, which is not true, because the misplaced and persecuted Jews they spoke about, a lot of them that were Holocaust survivors actually still lived in the regions that were in their homes or moved towards the United States or other countries. But the people that moved were not Jews. The majority of the Zionist government and regime are Jews by race, but that are secular, that have no association with Judaism, and we'll explain as we go further. So on the 15th of May, which is a few weeks, 2 weeks from now, I recall last year when we did Yawm Al Quds, or the year before, it coincided in the same time as Yawm Al Nakba, which is the day of the catastrophe, which is the 15th of May, 1948, where 700,000 Palestinians were expelled from their own land, pushed out of their land. Imagine someone says, and you see it today. So if some people cannot appreciate what we're talking about today, you'll actually see the way that they walk. Remember that video that went viral? The one with the woman saying to the guy, Jacob, this isn't your home. Do you remember that video? It went viral. Jacob, this isn't your home, you're stealing my home. And he says to her, if I don't steal, he actually said, if I don't steal it, somebody else will steal it. It's like saying to someone, oh, look, that's the argument people use for selling drugs. He says, look, man, drugs are on the market. If I'm not the one selling it, someone else is going to sell it. It's illogical. If I'm not the one killing people, someone else is going to kill them. It makes no sense whatsoever. So anyway, the tragedy here and the irony, you could say, is what happened to the Palestinians in 1948 was a mirror of what had happened to the Jews a decade before by Nazi Germany. A decade before. Lesson learnt in history. So they expelled them and they took their land. The Arabs got angered by this. They rose. You had several armies stand and say, we're going to take the right. But their leaders were, don't forget, these leaders weren't just normal leaders. They were handpicked. So after World War I and the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, all these governments, even Malik Faisal, for example, of Iraq, his famous saying in the 1920s is he said, Innani ana Sahyuni. He said, I am a Zionist. This is back in the 1920s. He said that when he was sitting with David Ben-Gurion and his likes, the one who the airport in Tel Aviv is named after. So he was someone that conceded that we're all with it. So these people were actually handpicked from the Arab leaders were handpicked by the West. So they had to show a show of force because their people would not accept, because the Muslims would not accept for other Muslims to be oppressed. However, the leaders were dissuaded with money and whatever of the what's it called, the if you look, not only the bribery, like if you want to talk about the embellishments of this dunya, they were given these kind of things, moved them all away from fighting. Years went by and the Arabs did nothing. They used to actually make television shows and about what was happening in Palestine, and they'd make a mockery of it. One of the Syrian actors, Duraid Laham, made a show called Al-Hudud, and it would make a mockery of what was happening in the Palestinian situation. That the Arabs say, we love you, but you can't come to us. And they just left them in-betweeners. They all became in-betweeners. They had nowhere to go. So in 1979, after the Islamic Revolution, Ibrahim Yazdi, who at the time was the vice president of Iran, because he was a close advisor to Imam Khomeini at the time, because Imam Khomeini rahmatullah alayhi was, when he was exiled, he was with him there. And of the things that he suggested and Imam Khomeini took on board was the Day of Quds. A day where we remember this, and then Imam Khomeini pushed it with force. And there was a reason why he pushed it with force. There's a big purpose behind pushing it with force. Because if we forget something, it just gets buried. Anything you forget just goes before you know it. See, the Jews taught us something. What was that? They taught us never to forgive, never to forget. Obviously, as Muslims, we learn to forgive when someone wrongs us and gives us back. But theirs was different. They never forgive and they never forget. And the problem is we, as Muslims in general, ignored this. But Imam Khomeini there said this must be something that was brought up. And this was a big move. Why? Number one, Imam Khomeini was not of Arab ethnicity. He was Persian, he was Iranian. And the Arabs in the world were not doing anything about it. In fact, in the same year, you had Anwar Sadat, okay, and he was taken away by Khalid al-Islambuli at the time. Even like, that's another situation. Khalid al-Islambuli, who rid the world of Anwar Sadat, was killed by the Muslims. They executed him. Yet, if you go to Iran and Tehran, they have Khalid Islambuli Square. They remember him, a young 18-year-old that was killed and was martyred over this issue. Why? Because Anwar Sadat was the first one to give recognition to Israel, which we'll talk about later. So, the whole idea is Yawm Al Quds sometimes gets passed off as purely a political stance, and it's not. The humanity of it gets trampled in the way. This is a big problem. People go, oh, it's Yawm Siyasi. No, there's a lot of political days. This isn't political. It's not political per se. This is something that requires great humanity to be able to fathom what's taking place. So anyway, this movement began. The movement of the International Day of Quds. It was to reinvigorate and to remind and to revive to people what took place on this day of Nakba. Firstly, what was put out is that Islam reigns supreme for the Muslims. In other words, even in Australia, what do we say? For God, Queen, and country. God is always first. Allah is supreme. Even in Australia, that's how it was before, because the Australian constitution was considered what? A Judeo-Christian constitution. Then now they say it's a secular government. But initially, it was God that reigned supreme. See, with this movement, Imam Khomeini wanted to put forward that Allah is in total control. Allah Azza wa Jal is above all. And Islam permeates through everything, every facet of our life. Islam dictates our way we live. And not only does Islam require us to rise, but your right as a human, your right to resist. It's your right not to accept to be occupied. I remember once I was at Heathrow Airport, and it was right at the beginning of the United States invasion of Iraq. And I was wearing a dashdash, and I was wearing a alaq chin, which is the Hajj cap. And so when I got to the front, they opened up my passport, and it was an open buffet of the axis of evil. So he took me inside for questioning. And when I sat with him, he asked me firstly about, this was before the United Kingdom had recognized Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. So they asked, you're Lebanese, what's your affiliation with this, what's your affiliation with that? And I said, I want to ask you a question. You're British born? He said, yes. I said, when the Nazis attacked England, he said, yeah. I said, what would you think of any Englishman that refused to defend their country or refused to support the defense of their country? He said, that person would be a traitor. I said, when Israel invaded Lebanon, are we denied that same right? He said, you're right. He agreed with me. He said, but we have a system to follow. This is what he said. In other words, these people empathize, they understand, and this is the reason why you have to wake them up, because some people wake up. How many winter soldiers you've seen, these ones that went to Iraq and came back and refused to fight because it was brought to their attention. The other thing that Imam Khomeini made, not only the fact that our resistance is our duty as a Muslim, but also as a human, he also brought forward that the Islamic religion is one. You're a Muslim, you're one. Because, you know, when I was once actually sitting with one of the most extreme, scholars, Islamic Shia scholars. When I say extreme, this guy curses everybody, you know. And I sat with him, I said to him, is it permissible for you to do riba of someone from another sect? He said, no, it is haram. Why? Even though he curses all day. I said, why? He said, because they have the right of a Muslim. So Islamically, everyone is under the umbrella of Islam. And this is what he put, that you're one. Because you know these differences that they bring, that we talk normally. It's our right to say our religion as it is. Their right to say their religion as there is. Our right to say Abu Sufyan and Muawiyah were evil. They can say the father of the Prophet was evil. That's their right. But as Muslims, we're all under the same banner. That we have said the Shahadatain, that we have all the rights of a Muslim. And this was something that he brought forward with this movement. But why Palestine? Here's a question. Why Palestine? Why is Palestine the focal point? Number one, Palestine is the longest military occupation to date. It's a military occupation from 1948 till today. Okay? Imagine that. You're talking about 15th of May, it'll be how long? 74 years. It's occupied. Well, how many people have lived for 74 years? Really? That's how long it's been. Also, Gaza, honestly, if anyone watched anything on Gaza, Gaza is an open air prison. It's a prison, nothing else. All the borders are closed. Whoever the Zionist occupation forces want, they just walk in and grab and take out. Okay, you want to go to Egypt, they've closed the borders. You want to go to the mainland of occupied Palestine, the borders are closed. There's nowhere to go. In fact, I saw a video where a guy his apartment had been hit, and he said, I got 8 kids, and this is our home. I built with my own hands. He said, I've never been with any of the resistance. I wanted to coexist. I don't want problems. He said, but now, because sometimes people don't talk till it hits home. When we tell people, beware of these people, they tell you, as long as it doesn't bother me, one day it gets back to you. What, do you wait for it to your home? So when he got hit, he said, now all my children are going to be resistance fighters. That's what he said. But what he had done wrong is initially, you're not living anyway. In Gaza, you're not really living. It's beyond, there's no future for you, there's nothing. And we always go back to this line, and I always want you to remember this line. Moshe Dayan, and this is something Noam Chomsky says. Noam Chomsky is a Jew. Noam Chomsky says Moshe Dayan, who was the defense minister of Israel in the 1960s, Moshe Dayan says either the Palestinians live like dogs or they die. Noam Chomsky said he said this to Alan Dershowitz, just to give you an idea who Alan Dershowitz. Alan Dershowitz is a hardline mainstream hardline professor from Harvard, hardline Zionist. In fact, his name was in Jeffrey Epstein's little black book from going to visit the Love Island, just the type of people they were. So Dershowitz is talking about two-state solution, which is nothing more than a lie. Doesn't even exist. Noam Chomsky said, if this is your real approach, that you want to coexist, okay, you really want to coexist, then what do? You want to coexist? Then condemn what Moshe Dayan said. Noam Chomsky said, up till today, no one dares to condemn what Moshe Dayan said. No one's condemned it. No one says, in other words, they are all complicit with it. Because if someone says one wrong thing, do you remember that I can't remember her name. The one that made the comment about Anzac Day, and then they just came down on her like a ton of bricks. The Muslim Ethiopian woman, what was her name? She made a comment. She was always on TV and everyone gave her attention. The second she made a comment on Anzac Day, they fell on her like a ton of bricks. Why? Because everyone condemns if you say anything slightly wrong. But something as big as this, no one ever made a problem with it. The other thing, Palestine, believe it or not, is the largest refugee problem in the world. I know it's hard to believe because you've been hearing Ukraine is. Palestine is the largest refugee problem in the world. So you don't think when these Ukrainians, which we'll talk about later if we have time, when they go into these other countries that they're thrown into little shoeboxes like the Palestinians are. A lot of people think Palestinians, when they go into other countries, like, they're given, they roll out the red carpet for them and white rice. No. These people, every country they go to, they're treated like rubbish. Every country. Even when they went to Jordan, they were treated so poorly. And obviously, King Hussein at the time in the 1970s, he said that they tell you that they're the problem. Amongst them, there are extremists. There's extremist factions amongst all of them. We're talking about the civilians, the ones that suffer, the ones that fall victim to these extremist factions that are there. We're not here with any of the Dawa'ish or any of these other groups. We oppose those. To hell with them. All these extremist groups, to hell with them. We're talking about the innocent people that are falling victim to what takes place. Now, two things you need to understand. We support the cause in Palestine. One, we support it for its humanitarian factor, okay? Because they are oppressed people, and this is for the sake of God. And secondly, we are enacting the teachings of Ahl al-Bayt, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhim ajma'in. Okay, what is our duty in this case? Firstly, with everything, let people know. Make people aware of what actually takes place. Because a lot of people, they don't know. When they see what happens, then they change. And you see this often. I was once working, and I mentioned this, I think last year or the year before, and this lady came to purchase an item of the place I was working at. And then she said to me, I went to Palestine, I did some work. And she was white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant. And I said, I'm surprised you call it Palestine, not Israel. She said it was Israel before I went there. She said, after I lived there, it became Palestine. I saw the way the Palestinians were treated. See, some people, they don't know this. They have no information. You know, one of the stories I always show people when I tell people not to buy, for example, Caterpillar. Anything made by Caterpillar, don't support them. Caterpillar are one of the biggest contributors to the bulldozers that run over Palestinian homes. In fact, I always mention there was a Caterpillar bulldozer that ran over Rachel Corrie, who was an American activist in the occupied territories, and she was just run over. She was crushed. Her legs were crushed by a bulldozer. And even though she was an American citizen, you look up Rachel Corrie, no one ever says anything about it. You know, all they'll say is that she shouldn't have been there in the first place. All right. One other thing a lot of people have is they say we're too weak. You know, we don't have the ability to make any noise. But the answer to that is, name me one movement that started strong. Have you ever seen a movement where, all right, we're going to resist? What have you got? We got 2,000 F-16 jets. You know, we've got 10,000 M1 Abrams tanks. You know, we've got 15,000 AH-64D Apache attack helicopters. Is that how people go to war? No. Look at the movement of Islam. What did they have? In the Battle of Badr with Shahr Ramadan, does anyone here know what they had in the Battle of Badr? How many swords do you think they had? They had 6, not even one each. They had 6 swords to be shared among 313. 6 swords. 6 swords. Do you know how many armor they had? 6. So basically, you wear your armor, your sword, you go fight, the next person takes it off you if something happens to you. Nothing. The other army had hundreds of swords. How many horses the Muslims had? They had 1. How many horses the Quraysh had? They had many. Every movement begins like this. When you talk about Karbala, when we talk about Al-Qasim ibn al-Hasan, how does he come out to fight? Do you remember the story? He comes out on his feet. Comes out walking. They weren't heavily equipped either. All these movements began like this, from a soft spot, not in a position of strength. And even today, most revolutions begin with who? The students. Revolutions begin with the students. The students are the ones that stand up. You might look at them, students, you know. And then Lebanese will say, they should be Yawm Al Quds. And what can this person do? Well, what's this person? No. When you stand and you say, no, I will not accept this. You know, when they teach you at school with bullying, what's the first thing they tell you to do? Stop. Because if you don't, that's the first action you do. To make them stop, like, I'm here, I exist. You're not going to do this to me. I'm not going to go down this way. And the pen is more mightier than the sword. Writing and making people aware of this. Another thing that they have is boycott, divest, and sanction, which is basically what it means is anything that strongly supports the Zionist entity, you have to cut it off. And now, don't be unrealistic with this. Don't say, I'm not going to support any country that supports Israel. You won't be buying anything. Really, because most countries support. It's the ones that are pro and are strong in this matter. They're the ones that you cut off. Okay. And this is pretty much what the West does with any country that doesn't fall in line. You know, they'll boycott anyone at any time, any place. You just don't know when it happens. Okay, the other thing that you can do is dua. During the July 2006 war, what was requested of all of you? Every second they tell you, can you read this dua? Read this many times this surah, read that. Why were they saying this? Because the Messenger of God sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam says, I will tell you about what the weapon of the Anbiya was. Do you want to know what the weapon of the Anbiya was? The Prophet's weapon? And they said, what was it, Ya Rasulullah? He says, a dua. A dua. You do dua, honestly, because you think about it. When you go to war, for example, the July war, why do I like to use it as a very important in Lebanon? Why was it very important? Because it was Lebanon versus the rest of the Western world. Israel ran out of rockets. They demolished, I know people like to use the word decimated, which actually means to cut something down by 10. It's not the actual word. But using it in that term, the country was devastated. Lebanon was absolutely annihilated, all the infrastructure. They set them back, I don't know how many years, country after country. What allowed them to defeat the Zionist entity? Dua. Dua was the support of the fighter. Allah says in the Quran, وَمَا رَمَيْتَ. If you are to fire, it's not you that's doing it. Allah is the one that's doing it. Allah Azza wa Jal assists. And that's what gives you victory, through supplication to Allah Azza wa Jal. And in this case, we have to, by doing this, we also recognize the other countries that have oppression, like the Yemen, Pakistan, Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, Bahrain, any of these countries where oppression exists. And we can't be selective. When oppression's oppression. Just because I like someone, sometimes you see this, someone likes someone and they're oppressing, they pretend they didn't see it. Someone oppresses, they're an oppressor, regardless of this. Okay, we talk about oppression. This day is where we plant the seed in standing against oppression. Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi, in his wasiyah, his commandments to his sons Al-Hasan wal-Hussein salawatullahi wa salamu alayhima, he says, Kuna lil-zalimi khasma. Kuna lil-zalimi khasma. Walil-mazlum awna. He says to his sons, be an opposition or an enemy or against the oppressor. He doesn't say the oppressing Muslim, the oppressing Jew, the oppressing Christian, the oppressing atheist. He says the oppressor. Always stand against the oppressor. Walil madlum awna. And be someone that helps the oppressed. This is how you have to be. You have to stand with the oppressed. This is the natural inclination of a Muslim. And this is the way they should be. See, this is what this day reminds you. International Day of Quds reminds you to stand against oppression. Be the oppression from a secular Jewish state, or be the oppression from the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It doesn't matter who. If there's oppression, I have to stand against this oppression. And if I don't take a stance, then where am I? Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam says, Al-amilu bil-dhulm, wal-mu'inu lahu, wal-radhi bih, shuraka thalathatuhum. Al-amilu bil-dhulm, the oppressor. And he says, wal-mu'inu lah, and his helper. What's his helper? What's a helper? A helper is everybody. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam says in a hadith, even the one that ties man rabat lahu kisa, says even the one that ties the bag for the oppressor. You've seen these people, they start off, they don't want anything to do, they give an opinion, and they're impartial. And slowly they get, I'll give you an example without naming somebody. I remember a guy in Australia who was a journalist. He was a real activist in his journalism. And he would always write about, and I remember his article against when they slandered the Prophet. I loved his article. And they did the rallies in the city. And he was talking about these Muslims that you're calling angry Their cages have been rattled for so long. It's not like they just became angry overnight. Real activist in journalism. Finally, they put him on his own television show. I'm not going to say his name. And now he just sings for them. Whatever tune they put for him, and now he'll sing the tune of Ukraine for them, whatever they want him to. Absolutely forgot where he stood, and he started with, he assists them in this manner. He assists the oppression. I have to take a stance even there. Especially in this month, Shahr Ramadan al-Mubarak, we have to think of those that are less fortunate than us. This is what we're told, isn't that right? Okay. The other thing is there only a Muslim stance, the International Day of Quds? Is it only a Muslim stance? Is it only for Muslims? You'll find, firstly, less than 60%, and this is an actual statistic that I got it from their sources, so not from ours, because it will say 100%. I don't want anything that, always when you get statistics, try and get it from the source that you're talking about, because at least you can use it as a hujjah, an argument against them. They say 58% of Jews are emotionally supportive of the state of Israel. 58%. So when someone tells you it's a Jewish state, it's not really a Jewish state. It's a secular state. Okay? And in fact, one of the articles that I was reading for the editor-in-chief of Jewish Currents for the Guardian newspaper, her name is Ariel Angel. She mentions that she was an ardent Zionist until when? Listen to this. She said, until I was profoundly shaken by images in the papers. See, when you bring things out, said of the Palestinian children bombed to pieces on the beach, and the Israelis in rattled buffer town of Sderot, gathered on hilltops, listen to this, overlooking the strip, cheering as the bombs fell. So you're listening? They get affected by this. And could you imagine someone you loved, someone you supported, and they were doing this? If you still support them, you got rocks in your head. So for her, that was a moment where she had a moment of clarity. This is not only an Islamic stance, this is anyone with any humanity whatsoever. Another thing is, a lot of people ask, doesn't this make you anti-Semitic? Because they're pushing the movement that this is a neo-anti-Semitism. See, because we are not anti-Jewish. We never have been. Even the Jews that lived amongst the Muslims, they called it the golden age when they were living there. It was the golden era of the Jews. There was no problems. Let's think about it. The Jews living in Palestine beforehand, living in these regions, what was happening to them? They were coexisting with the other Christians and the Muslims. It wasn't until this secular Zionist neo-conservative entity came in and changed everything. They destroyed everything that existed there. Okay, so here's what happens. When you decide, okay, I'm going to go against a movement that they want to push. You guys are very into the last 2 years. If you were better off telling someone that you had AIDS than telling them that you haven't been vaccinated. True or not true? They wouldn't have you say, oh, you got AIDS, that's all right. We can share a needle together. We'll be right. They'd have no issue. But tell someone you're not vaccinated? From what part of hell did you come from? Get away from me. Jahil. This is not what it reached. See, when they want to push something through, and one of the biggest pushers of this was Israel themselves. Did you know that they forced their people to be double vaxxed, and they really push it. Now, they were the first country to say non-vaccinated can actually come in now. And you see the extremes from one extreme to the other, saying this is the way they push it. Because we live in the world of cancel culture now. Open your mouth, that's it. It's finished. And this is what takes us to the other point too. Okay? 2 points. One, is there a distinction between Judaism and Zionism? 100%. Firstly, Judaism has what? The 10 Commandments. 2 of those commandments are destroyed. Thou shalt not kill, the 6th commandment, and that's what the Zionists do all the time. And they actually target children. Because when you're talking about smart bombs. Remember when they smashed, for example, Qana, and they hit them with actually smart bombs. When they hit and killed non-combatant men, women, and children. And even when they killed, like you've seen where a sniper hits a young child in between the eyes. It's a direct shot. You know what I mean? Some people don't miss when they're playing a game with a headshot. So imagine these guys that are trained and they're not mobile headshots. They're actually standing there and they shoot them. They're shooting children. Thou shalt not kill. 6 commandments broken. The 10th commandment's also broken. Thou shalt not covet what is for the neighbor, or they put it as the neighbor's wife, but anything of the neighbor, anything, that's a 10th commandment, that you should respect your neighbor. They were your neighbors. Not only do they do not respect them, they also remove them from their homes and take their homes. That's why it's different to Judaism. Judaism, if you look in the book of Leviticus, the book of Laws, chapter Leviticus 18:23, Leviticus 20:13, both condemn homosexuality. In fact, in 2013, it actually says they should be put to death. Tel Aviv today is the most homosexual-friendly city in the world. Did you know that? So it's not Jewish. It's secular. So don't associate this with that. Why are people afraid to discuss the subject? Because they want to live. They want a job. Like I mentioned, cancel culture. You say something, you're gone, you'll disappear. You noticed everyone before they're running for election, go up to Albanese or Morrison, ask them about Israel. They'll do you a little jig and dance and start singing a quartet just so that you can vote for them. Why? Because this is what the most important thing is for them when it comes to getting into election. It's how loyal and how in love are you with Israel. This is where it goes to. And the perpetrators are always portrayed as the victims. No matter what happens. You know, I remember John Stewart. He had this is one of the, John Stewart is another secular Jew. Once again, showing you. John Stewart is showing a report where the Palestinians and the Israelis are fighting. And he says, and everyone's saying, the poor Israelis, he said, let's take a look at the media of Palestine. It has this guy with a helmet on, body armor and everything, and he's hiding. And then it shows the Israeli journalist, and he's just wearing a shirt and he looks like he's out in the sun. And he said, look at the contrast. Who's the one under attack? The other guy's not even wearing body armor. He knows. Yeah, just to give you an idea, these rockets that they fire at the Palestinians, these Katyushas that they put on sticks, basically, honestly. And they just go. There's something that the old Soviet Union threw out up against the modern technology that exists, but they still resist nonetheless. The other thing is the West has always considered the Muslims to be, just like when they came here. How old is Australia? I want to ask you a question. How old is Australia? Give me an answer. How old is Australia? Huh? How old? 200? That's right. That's the way they taught you to count. When the white man came here, Australia existed. Australia didn't exist before the white man came here, before it was colonized. This is the mentality they use. When they want you to think of the Kuri or the one that was living here, they want you to think that that was a backward person. They called them what? Pagans. Remember I said to you when Christopher Columbus came into the United States, he was so arrogant that he called the indigenous people Indians. Because he was that drunk, he thought he had landed in India. They called them Indians, and up till today, what do they call them? Indians. Because that's the arrogance. They see that the Arab lands were uninhabited, uncivilized, even though Babylon and Iraq is the cradle of civilization. Go look, what's the oldest? Who studies ancient history? Is there anything older than ancient Sumer that we know in civilization? The oldest civilization spread between Iran and Iraq was the Sumerian. And they lived off the two main rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. That's where civilization began, but they saw us as uncivilized. In fact, they always portray us as backwards. Every movie you watch, the Arab's always stupid. I remember when I was young, I watched The Mummy. And she says these camels, they're unruly creatures, always spitting, and then shows the Arab sitting on the camel and just spits. And everyone laughs when they see this, but this is the way they portray them, backwards and stupid and silly. camel herders, nothing more, nothing of any value. In fact, even when you look at them, they were always referred to, anyone that used to resist was called a mukharrib, a destroyer, someone that's causing problems and nothing more. But let's take a look at how the West deals with unruly states. Let's take a look at South Africa. South Africa, the West cut them off from everything. Sorry, I've stayed a bit too long, but bear with me. We don't get to talk about this that often. South Africa was treated as what? An apartheid state. They weren't allowed to do anything. They weren't allowed to compete in any sport. They were kicked out. When America had a problem with the Soviet Union, the Americans refused to participate in the 1980 Moscow Olympics. Isn't that right? They refused to participate. And then the Soviet Union repaid them in 84 in the Los Angeles Olympics. They refused to participate, and the Americans won all the gold. Because there was no more Russians, no more Soviets in that Olympics. However, that was all good and proper. When the Algerian athlete refused to compete against the Israeli, they banned him for 10 years when he took a stance. They banned him from competition for 10 years. And suddenly they just kicked Russia out of what? They kicked them out of the World Cup. They wouldn't let him even qualify, even though they were on the last leg to get in. They wouldn't let Russia qualify. This is how they take a stance, and this is how the stance should be taken against Israel. Look at the way where, if you are on Facebook, you can actually write death to Putin now. But you can't say death to the Zionist occupation forces. That wouldn't be allowed. So they show you when someone and they oppose someone, how they totally destroy them. We don't use dirty tactics. Why? Because we fear God. That's the difference. And you see this even in our movements, we fear God. Even when we go back to the July war, where Sayyid Hassan mentioned that we could have hit their gas plants, the gas, we could cause big terror. We could destroy, but we don't do this. We're not like that. This is why when they keep saying that Iran's trying to make a nuclear weapon, we can't even use it. So even if we made it, what are we going to do with it? You can't even use it. And it hasn't deterred anybody. Every country that has a nuclear weapon, what happens? Pakistan and India are always fighting. They both have nuclear weapons. Hasn't stopped anybody. Does nothing. But to let you know, for me, I've summed it up with this. The first thing is never recognize the existence of Israel. Refusal to recognize the existence of Israel. The best exponent of this was Sheikh Raghib Harb. When the Israeli wanted to shake his hand, the commander, he refused to shake his hand. He said, because if I shake your hand, it means I recognize you exist. That was the first thing. Refusal to recognize the existence of an entity. Secondly, resistance. When you resist, and when I say, the first part of it, is refuse. Second one is response. You need to respond to aggression. You can't be of the people that stands back. A lot of countries, when the Nazis, for example, went into France and they were killing the French, they took over Paris in 6 weeks, all the French would tell the other citizens, don't resist, because the Nazis, if you resist, they're going to slaughter us. And then some French said, no, you have to resist. So what? And the day that, before Israel used to bomb, the day that the Muslims started firing back, Sayyid Abbas al-Musawi said what? He said, Israel has been defeated. They have fallen. Why? Because people have responded now. Before, no one used to respond. Even if you were to throw a ball of clay, a stone, you responded. And they show you this when you used to watch that Disney animation, A Bug's Life, when he tells him, when they resist. Remember the one where the ants are up against the grasshoppers? When you resist, they don't realize what they teach us from these shows. Some of those teach us bad things, but this teaches you, even if you're an ant, resist. You fight or you die. You have to resist. So the first thing is refuse to acknowledge, refuse to recognize Israel. Number 2, always respond. Don't ever stand back. When something comes up, say no. Don't be one of those that says, all right, I'm not going to say a word. No, respond. And the third thing, that the Muslims had done, which would honestly, in your life, you would never imagine this. My father, Allah yurham, used to take my brother down to the border where this is back, I'm talking about back in the 1970s. This is before the Israeli occupation of Lebanon. He would show him, he said, see this tree? He said, years ago, that tree was he pointed, it was in the Israeli border. He said, this was in Lebanon. So they were even moving the border up. Because the borders are pretty much what? They're mapped out by them. So they were just taking over land and no one was saying a word. Everyone's quiet. You know, it's like, oh, it's not my ard, it's not my land, it doesn't matter, it's someone else's. People are like that, they're not worried. And you don't realize you're the next victim. This is the appetizer. Palestine is just the appetizer. Everyone else is going to go down. This is where it begins. It begins right there. So no one ever imagined that the Zionist entity would ever be removed. And in 2000, the Zionist entity gave up land. They've never done that before. And they regressed. And they were defeated. And they came out. And the South Lebanese army that they had put on the land in South Lebanon was defeated and removed. And that was during the time of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, whom you're not allowed to support now because he's considered to be a terrorist. They consider him the same as Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, you know, or Osama bin Laden. This is the world you live in today. You know, honestly, if you were to think about it, that someone like Elton John would become a knight and someone like Sayyid Hassan would become a terrorist, honestly, what kind of a world do you live in? But anyway, that's another thing. Finally, there will be the establishment of the righteous religion with our master Al-Hujjat ibn al-Hassan al-Mahdi. But there will be no apartheid. Everyone will live. You know, when it says that he will put justice on the earth, it doesn't mean he'll put sword to people to believe. He will instill justice that everyone living on the earth, they're not forced. There's never, see, there's la ikraha fi din. The Quran is perpetual to the day of judgment. So there will be Christians, there will be Jews, there will be even anyone, atheists, will be living at the time of the Imam, but under the laws of Islam, because it will cover the entire universe. Not the entire, the universe will be under the government of Imam Al-Hujjah Ajalallah Farajahu Sharif. I really apologize for the longevity of this speech. I am so sorry. There was so much for me to gather here. But just remember this. Always remember this is the root of all problems. Whenever someone talks Daesh, the root is Israel. All the Arab governments that are doing sujood to Tel Aviv, the root is Israel. You know, you saw the Aqsa being attacked while they were doing iftar. The root is Israel. The origin of all problems is the Zionist entity that exists in the Middle East. So this is what you always need to keep in your mind. And your job is what I mentioned. You boycott them. You let people know what's happening. And you're right. This is, like I said, your position in Australia where you have a voice. You let people know of the position. You educate the people in any way. At work, wherever you are, at school, you educate people and you let them know about what's happening in the world today. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to accept our deeds in this holy month, and this month has not passed by except that we have all been forgiven for our transgressions. We ask Allah to restore justice on the earth under the standard of our master Al-Hujjat ibn al-Hassan al-Mahdi. Arwahuna fida. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. أعوذ بجلال وجهك الكريم عني شهر رمضان أو يطلع الفجر من ليلتي هذه ولك قبلي تبعة أو ذنب تعذبني عليه، وإلى أرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات، ولقبول الأعمال وقضاء الحوائج وشفاء المرضى وغفران الذنوب وتعجيل الفرج وحسن العاقبة، وأرواح موتانا جميعا وأرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات. رحم الله من قرأ سورة المباركة الفاتحة مع الصلوات.